19 appearances, 19 first-round wins. That was Novak Djokovic's record at the Foro Italico before Thursday. 19 matches across nearly 2 decades of Roman clay, and not once had he fallen at the first hurdle, until a 20-year-old from Split walked onto that court and dismantled the whole mythology in 2 sets and a tiebreaker. Let me tell you what actually happened, because the score line, 2-6, 6-2, 4-6 in favor of Dino Prizmic, doesn't tell you the real story. Not even close. I was watching the tape back on that second set, specifically the opening 2 games, and what struck me wasn't Prismic's aggression, it was Djokovic's feet. Watch him at 0:30 in that very first game of the second set. His split step is late. Not by a lot, maybe a quarter of a second, but at this level, a quarter of a second is the difference between setting up an inside out forehand and shanking a defensive slice into the tram lines. Djokovic was shanking. On clay, in Rome. That is not a sentence I expected to write in 2025. Now, before you tell me this is just a bad day, every champion gets a bad day. I want you to sit with something. Djokovic himself stood in that press conference afterward and said, and I'm paraphrasing very closely here, that he cannot remember a single moment in the last 2.5 years without a physical problem heading into a tournament. 2.5 years. That's not a slump. That's not a rough patch. That is a structural crisis in the body of the greatest tennis player who ever lived, and the tour is starting to notice. Here's the bit that actually bothers me. The first set was fine, more than fine actually. Djokovic won it 6-2, controlling the longer exchanges with that maddening, suffocating baseline depth he's been deploying since 2011. In the rallies that went beyond 9 shots, the grind points, the ones that break weaker wills, he was dominant. Prismic was visibly uncomfortable, pushed 2 meters behind the baseline, spraying errors. Classic Djokovic clay court construction. You watch it and you think, right, this is going to be 6-2, 6-3, and we're all going home. Then the second set happened. Prismic broke to love in the very first game. And I mean to love, Djokovic didn't win a single point on his own serve. That is a statement. That is a 20-year-old looking across the net at a 37-year-old god of the sport and deciding consciously that he wasn't afraid. The Croat's return positioning had shifted. He was standing a full step inside the baseline on second serves, taking the ball early, denying Djokovic the time to set up his patented cross-court backhand construction. That adjustment didn't happen by accident. Someone had done their homework, back-to-back breaks, 3-0. The Foro Italico crowd, which had come to pay homage to Djokovic, fell into that particular hush that only happens when something genuinely unexpected is unfolding. I've heard it at Wimbledon in 2023. I heard it here. It's the sound of a crowd recalibrating its expectations in real time. Now, here's where I have to give Prismic his full credit, because the temptation when Djokovic loses is to immediately explain it away through the lens of the winner's opponent. Dino Prizmic is not a fluke. I've been watching this kid since his juniors run, and what he has, and the thing that separates him from the other big hitting prospects the Croatian system keeps producing, is timing. His ground strokes aren't just heavy, they're early. He strikes the ball at the top of the bounce with a consistency that most 20-year-olds can't sustain under pressure, let alone in a third set against the most decorated clay court player of the Open era. He required a medical timeout midway through for back discomfort, which, if anything, makes what he produced more impressive. He was in physical distress and still managed to hold his nerve to serve out the match at 5-4 in the third. Ice. Absolute ice. I was looking at the tape on that 2-2 break in the decider. The moment the match was truly decided, and you can see exactly when Djokovic's physical situation became critical. He's bent slightly at the waist between points. He's taking longer to get back to position. At one point, a member of his team passes him what appears to be some kind of pill or medication during the changeover, and Djokovic takes it without hesitation. This is a man managing his body point by point. And yet he still pushed Prismic to 4-6 in the third. That, paradoxically, is both a testament to his greatness and the most worrying thing about what I saw. Because if Djokovic at 60, 70%, medicated, physically compromised, dealing with what he vaguely described as stomach issues, can still make it a contest, then the question isn't whether he can still play. The question is whether he can ever be fully healthy again. And right now, the honest answer is nobody knows. Not his team, not his doctors, and I'd wager not Novak himself. He said in his press conference that he doesn't know if he'll arrive at Roland Garros in good shape. Think about that for a moment. This is a man who has won Roland Garros 3 times. A man who, on clay, is statistically the most consistent performer the sport has ever seen outside of Rafael Nadal. And he's standing at a microphone in Rome, shrugging, telling the world he genuinely isn't sure if his body will cooperate in 3 weeks. That is a haunting image, and I don't think the broader tennis world has fully absorbed what it means. What it means for the draw at Roland Garros is significant. Every player in Djokovic's section of the draw, and we'll know more once the seedings are confirmed, has to be quietly recalibrating. Not because Djokovic is finished, he is absolutely not finished, but because the version of Djokovic that shows up might not be the version that went 12-0 on clay coming into Roland Garros in 2021. It might be this version, the version that gets broken to love in the opening game of the second set by a 20-year-old who had never beaten a top 10 player on clay before Thursday. The social media reaction from inside the locker room has been telling. I've seen several players posting workout content with Rome in the background, the kind of posts that feel pointed when your biggest rival has just been knocked out in the first round. The scent of opportunity is real. Carlos Alcaraz, who is the defending champion here and who will be watching this result very carefully, has to fancy his chances at Roland Garros right now more than he has since winning it in 2024. Yannick Sinner, despite his own ongoing legal situation, has a path to another major that just got marginally clearer. If you're a purist, you're going to hate this. But the Italian Open result confirms something I've been arguing since the Australian Open. The era of fearing Djokovic as an immovable obstacle is over. Respecting him? Absolutely. Recognizing that on any given day, a healthy Novak Djokovic can still beat anyone on the planet, without question. But the psychological deterrent, that aura of inevitability that made opponents fold before a ball was struck, that is diminished. Prismic proved it. He wasn't intimidated. He adjusted tactically mid match. He won a physical battle while dealing with his own back issue, and he served it out under pressure. That takes belief. And that belief was only possible because the myth has cracked. Here's my prediction for the next 3 months, and I'm going to be direct about this. Djokovic reaches Roland Garros. He wins one or two matches and then exits before the quarterfinal. Not because he doesn't have the skill, but because the body cannot sustain 3 weeks of best of five clay court tennis in this condition. The workload is simply too great for a 37-year-old managing chronic physical problems. If I'm wrong, I'll be the first to say so. But the evidence on the ground right now, Rome, his own words, the pattern of the last 2.5 years on points in one direction. Prismic, on the other hand, is going to Roland Garros with something money cannot buy, the knowledge that he beat Novak Djokovic on clay in a Grand Slam preparatory Masters event when it mattered. That is going in the mental bank. That is going in the pre-match notes for every opponent he faces from here on. Watch this kid over the next 18 months. His movement, his timing, his fearless shot selection under pressure. The clay swing has just produced its most significant result of 2025, and I don't think we've seen close to the last of Dino Prizmic. The rest of the tour has been put on notice, and it's not by the player everyone expected.